Hey guys, my name's Paul Zala. I'm a producer, DJ, and author of the book How to Make Great Music Mashups, the start to finish guide to making mashups with Ableton Live. These videos are made for following along with the book, in the chapters where I show you the techniques to create your mashups in Ableton Live. But if you don't have the book, that's no problem. You can still follow along and learn the techniques that will take your mashups to the next level. You'll need a copy of Ableton Live to follow along and try the methods yourself though. We're going to cover all sorts of things like getting familiar with Ableton Live, warping, effects and automation, setting up an Ableton Live template, as well as the inner workings of mashups, such as arrangement, making do-it-yourself acapellas, and all the techniques you'll need to create great transitions. So let's get started. Firstly, I want to brush up on a few audio terms that you'll need to understand before we can get into the techniques: volume, frequency, and equalization. In the world around us, sound travels as pressure waves through the air and other media. Digital audio is an approximation of this real-life waveform, which is stored using PCM, or pulse code modulation. In recorded media, WAV files, CDs, DVDs, and Blu-rays all use PCM to describe the ever-changing audio signal using thousands of tiny snapshots of the audio signal each second. These snapshots are called samples, and a sample is basically a description of the signal's amplitude or level at a particular time. You may have heard of a couple of common sample rates, such as 44,100 or 48,000. This sample rate refers to the number of samples actually used every second. When a sound is digitally recorded using a microphone, an analog to digital converter will translate the position of the diaphragm inside the microphone into a sample. The sample literally describes the amount of air pressure on the microphone at that split second. Later on, when each sample is translated back into sound, it's translated into an electrical amplitude, causing the speaker to move in and out. The cone moves and reconstructs the original recorded sound. While reproducing sound, the speaker cone flutters between positive and negative positions. When the audio signal is silent, the cone remains at rest in the middle. So this brings us to volume. The power or intensity of vibrations as they occur in the air just outside our ears can vary enormously. If you take the smallest vibration we can detect in an ideal environment and compare it with the loudest vibrations, that is, vibrations that are loud enough to make us feel physical pain, the larger vibration is about 1,000,000,000,000 times as powerful as the smaller one, or 1,000,000,000,000. This is a seriously huge difference, as either a physical sound pressure wave or an audio signal gets progressively louder. Its level keeps multiplying exponentially rather than increasing in a straight line. This is why on paper, the differences between these volumes look so immense when measured as power or intensity. However, we don't hear changes in volume as exponential, they sound linear to us. So in audio, we use a measurement which feels much more intuitive, known as the decibel. The decibel uses a logarithmic scale, which helps rein in this crazy exponential effect by pulling it into a manageable range, which looks more linear to us. It also allows us to express volume using numbers that are more like the way we hear it. Another reason why it makes sense for us to use the decibel in audio is that it actually describes a change in volume. Technically, the decibel is just a ratio between two numbers. The concept of the decibel may seem a little confusing now, but you don't have to understand the mathematics to be able to make good use of it. The best approach is to simply develop a feel for it as you work on mashups, which you will because you'll be constantly altering the volume of clips and tracks. Ableton Live will tell you where your volume faders are sitting in decibels. Believe it or not, quite soon you'll know instinctively how many dB you want to move a sound before you even touch the fader. In the audio world, there's another type of dB measurement you need to be aware of. What we've talked about so far is its use as a measure of the change in power of an audio signal, but it can also be used in comparison to a reference level, in this case, the maximum level of a digital signal, which we call full scale. In other words, if you have a sound that reaches a peak of -6 decibels full scale, you're saying that it's 6 dB quieter than its loudest possible amplitude. Any attempt to boost that audio signal to above 0 dB full scale will result in clipping, where samples straining to be recorded outside the most positive or negative amplitudes will be rounded back to the closest allowable value, flattening the largest peaks in the signal. This is called clipping. We'll talk more about this later when setting up a protective limiter on our master track. So let's talk about frequency. Frequency refers to the rate at which an audio wave shape cycles or repeats its pattern. The simplest wave shape is a sine wave, which you can see here. A sine wave oscillates above and below the zero line at a steady rate. The rate of this cycle, measured in hertz, is how many cycles it performs in 1 second. If it takes 1 second to make a full cycle from the 0 point up to the highest point, back down past the zero line to its lowest point, and then back to the beginning, it has a frequency of 1 hertz, that is 1 cycle per second. If it can make the journey 5 times within a second, it's a 5 hertz wave. When you look at your everyday piece of music, the waveform is quite complex and is actually made up of many waves. Think of any audio waveform as containing many different sine waves of differing frequencies all layered on top of one another. Some wave patterns make it very easy to identify the frequencies in it, like the steady tone of a synth note or a note in a vocal performance. Other frequencies introduced during drum hits, vocal consonants, or instrumental overtones are very hard to identify because they're fleeting or transient. But it doesn't mean we don't hear them. Even if they only have time to create a couple of cycles, they still have an effect on our ear. Whilst the lower frequencies look like the long, undulating hills of the wave shape, the higher frequencies look like tiny bumps on the surfaces of those hills. Lastly, let's talk about equalization. A lot of the effects processing we must do in a mashup involves using an equalizer, so it's important to understand what it is and how it works. An equalizer is an audio processor that changes the balance between frequencies on an incoming audio signal. Each change you make to the equalization of an audio signal is like moving a volume control, except it's for a particular area of frequencies. It's used to shape the tone of a sound by altering the relationship between frequencies, boosting target areas of the incoming signal up or pulling them down. Each EQ device will have one or more bands with a frequency setting which targets a particular frequency, measured in hertz. A gain setting which changes the volume of that frequency, measured in decibels, and usually a Q or resonance setting which determines how many of the frequencies adjacent to the target frequency are also affected. To try and make this clear, I'll go through a few examples using an equalizer, and I'll play a piece of music through it since the music will have plenty of frequency information all the way from the bottom to the top of the spectrum. Equalizers come in all shapes and sizes and have different uses. Traditionally, each real-world EQ unit would only perform 1 or 2 types of EQ function. But modern plugins in the digital world, such as LiveZone EQ8, seen here, can perform multiple types at once. The simplest type of EQ is known as shelving EQ. The user picks a frequency for the EQ to start equalizing from, then they either pick a high shelf to affect frequencies from the target frequency upwards, or low shelf setting to affect the frequencies from the target frequency and downwards. Then it's just a matter of moving the gain setting to either amplify or attenuate the volume of the designated frequency band. The bass and treble knobs on hi-fi systems, car stereos, or a DJ mixer perform the very same thing, just a shelf equalization. They just don't tell you what the target frequencies are. Filter EQs are similar to shelf EQs in that they target a specific frequency and affect the frequencies above or below them. The difference is that rather than performing a constant gain change across the band, they cut the frequencies out completely. A high-pass filter, also known as a low-cut filter, filters out the frequency below the target, and a low-pass filter, also known as a high-cut filter, cuts off the ones above it. To use one, you simply choose high pass or low pass mode and select the target frequency. You don't need to worry about choosing a gain setting because this mode is intending to completely cut that section of frequencies out. Some modern models allow you to choose from a selection of slopes which determine how quickly the volume drops as you move further out from the target frequency. Usually the slope setting contains a selection of decibel per octave values, such as 6, 12 or 24 decibels per octave. Those simple filters with no setting will usually operate at 6 dB per octave. Other filters often express their slope as Q or resonance, which, if turned up, add lots of sharp boost at the target frequency. A slow, smooth slope is more natural to the ear, whilst a sharper slope with resonance cuts more surgically and draws attention to itself. Though filter EQs are traditionally used for cutting away unnecessary frequencies in the top or bottom end of the sound, they are prominently used with intentionally sharp slopes in dance music. Parametric EQ gives the user a chance to affect a specific band of frequencies without affecting all of the high or low end information either side of it. It targets a frequency chosen by the user and is brought up or down in level using the gain setting. The frequencies either side of the target are affected as well, but the gain on these frequencies tapers off in a bell curve. That's why a parametric EQ is usually given the symbol of a bell curve. The width of this curve depends on the Q or resonance setting. A high Q value tells the equalizer to make the gain change extremely narrow, causing a very sharp change at the target, a specific but fairly noticeable EQ change. On the other hand, a low Q value tells the EQ to let the gain changes expand out across the adjacent frequencies, causing more of an overall volume change, but also a very natural shape that is less conspicuous. Parametric EQ is usually the type used to boost and bring out a particular part of an instrument. That should pretty much get you up to speed on what you need to know on the background into digital audio and how to work with decibels, frequencies, and equalizers. If you're reading along with the book, you'll already know how to come up with great mashup pairings and understand the theory of why some pieces of music work together. So if you're ready, let's move on into getting to know Ableton Live for the purpose of creating mashups. See you in the next video, and thanks for watching.